Imagine you just rock up to a scene, boom, I'm done. The only way to actually get a sense of community is to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
Is to start networking, is to start driving value for other people.
If you could give like one technical piece of advice for street photography.
Seemingly simple, but kind of hard to master. And it's the same advice that I actually give for portraiture.
Okay, you have to elaborate. I'm intrigued. Welcome to the Full Frame Podcast presented by Sony. I'm Clyde Vaughan, photographer, filmmaker, and Sony Digital Imaging Advocate. We've created this podcast to bring together the community and share the talented work and stories from creators across Australia and New Zealand. We'll be chatting to ambassadors, advocates, and creators, as well as doing deep dives into technical gear with our Sony product specialists. Join us every Tuesday for the latest conversations, as well as follow us at sonyalpha.anz, where you can submit questions and give us feedback. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. This is the Full Frame Podcast presented by Sony. I'm Clyde, and this is Pat K.
Hello, everyone. I'm Pat K. I'm a travel photographer, Sony Digital Imaging Ambassador, based in Tokyo, Japan, actually, but grew up in Sydney and decided to move to Japan to pursue more of my photography career. At the moment, back for condo, actually. So I fly back to Sydney in Australia every year for our condo event and make sure that I'm here because it's just such a fantastic event to reconnect with everyone and spend time with you guys. Super excited to talk about that today.
And also here for the podcast.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely here for the podcast.
But we just got back from Condo. Condo is like Australia and New Zealand's big community event, bringing together ambassadors, advocates, creators, friends and family of Sony, so to speak. This time it was down in Hobart in Tasmania. We've done the Gold Coast and Queensland before. And yeah, we just got back. It was a 4-day experience.
Yeah, I mean, condo is such a special thing, right? Because it's something that Sony and Sony alone does. I don't know of any other like camera brand doing something of this size and
the scale and like level of execution, right?
Absolutely blows me away every single time. This year, no exception. Of course, we went to Tasmania, Hobart, which I really like because I love the cold.
Yeah,
the last two condos were like very like, warm, humid, that kind of vibe. But yeah, we stayed at the Mac Hotel and then had pretty much 2.5 days, 3 days of skirmishing around Hobart and doing various photography activities and stuff like that. Super fun to catch up with everyone. We joke a lot about like, I'll see you at next year, once a year catch up kind of thing, and it's just so great to catch up with everyone in the community and stuff like that and, do all the activities and all the rest of it.
Yeah, for me, it's not so much about the shooting. Like it is cool to shoot some like fun stuff.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that really makes it stand out is, like you said, like the people and the community and catching up with everyone that you've kind of got to know over previous years and so on. I mean, like there is a lot of shooting experiences. Like we did mountain biking. There was a boat tour. Some people got a helicopter ride. Yeah, you got on that one.
Me.
Yeah. So there was some really cool experiences. But for me, the big takeaway is like it's bringing together the whole kind of team and kind of giving a unified direction to like what Sony wants going forward, and also like dealing with scene and the community platform that Sony's working really hard to develop.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For me, it's also like, there's so many talented creators there and, just talented photographers, videographers, and just skilled creative people.
Yeah.
It's just amazing to be around that much talent and see other people working, catching up with what they're doing and getting their stories of like, what have you been doing this past year and all that kind of stuff, and just hearing all these amazing stories. And I love that aspect the most as well.
Yeah.
Same with you, the shooting experiences are amazing, and they are most certainly like to the level where it's like, I would never put this on myself.
Yeah.
And I would never shoot this myself because it's so outside of my, realm of expertise. But that just executed so well.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so glad I get these opportunities because I wouldn't shoot these otherwise, and in this amazing setting. So yeah, we started off the whole condo experience with going to the
Theatre Royale.
The Theatre Royale, yeah. Which was such a cool experience because I don't do a lot of theatre. I haven't been to a lot of theatres. But they set it up in such a way that they had 3 different acts. And then you were able to go like backstage and, check
Yeah, it
them
was
out.
like an all access kind of
All access
experience.
thing, you got to shoot them getting ready and then go backwards and kind of see the performances from side stage and stuff like that. And, it was just all so well put together. And
What was your favorite activity?
overall? Or Orlando?
The helicopter ride, right?
Actually, no.
Oh, that's
surprisingly no. So the helicopter ride was fantastic. Don't get me wrong, and I love the Tasmanian landscapes. I did manage to cop a middle seat, so the photos that I ended up getting weren't as good as I would have wanted. But actually, the boxing was my favorite.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just so like well put together. Like, a very old school fight scene, just a very simple white ring around a room that's just lit up and super aesthetic with a lot of fog and smoke and lights. And, the actors were just amazing. They teach boxercise and boxing exercise in real life. And so, they're just like sparring with each other really lightly and stuff like that. But, you could tell they knew what they were doing. And, it was really, really well put together, and the theme and everything was just so locked in, and it was such a fantastic experience that, I don't know. It's just, it was really, really good.
I noticed that a lot with my own workshops, and a lot of the workshops that the other ambassadors and advocates run through Sony Scene is rather than creating a shot list or creating a specific shot, it's building out a scene that then people have a better time shooting. Like you said, it's not just a single shot of a boxing match. The whole scene was curated to have like movement, action, emotion, and it's like lit like a film set. And I think obviously like that, Sony has that like history in filmmaking. And I think that really shows with the kind of events that they're running for us. Yeah.
That's such a privilege, honestly, to have someone think about a set at that level and to that degree. Yeah, absolutely good.
And I find that so funny because the list of people that are there, like, the creators, advocates, ambassadors, and so on, everyone has their own like niche or their own skill set. But it's really incredible to be, in a scene with someone who maybe shoots stills, and then you're next to someone else who's, like if you're standing in a room with Pete DeVries, who works obviously with like James Cameron and everything, and you're standing next to him and he's saying, oh, maybe we adjust this slide or let's move over here. And you're like, okay, I'm going to listen exactly to what you're saying because, So it's like that passing on of knowledge, not just from people who are far more ahead than me in my career, but just being able to collectively learn and grow together.
Yeah, and even at a basic level, just, what is someone else's perspective? What is someone else shooting? Like, why are they standing there? That kind of stuff. It's like, it's so great to be able to learn from someone else just through osmosis.
Yeah, that's a good term for it. Yeah. I find that when I'm shooting something that's outside of my kind of wheelhouse, if I end up standing behind or next to someone who that's their thing, I'm like, all right, sweet, I'm in the right position. Yeah.
That's what I was doing as well. Yeah.
Let's do a bit of a rewind, bit of a throwback to the old Sydney street days. Do you want to talk us through kind of the community that you were a part of or that you also helped develop, and talk us through kind of like how that shaped your career and moving forward, like what kind of direction you think community has for people like us?
Sure. Huge stories here.
That was a huge question.
Yeah, which is great. I think it also requires a little bit of my own context on like my own background and what I focused on in my early photography days. So, I was very inspired by street photography to start with, because in a world of photography where you can choose, umpteen different categories and genres to go and pursue, what is interesting to you, when you're first starting out. And so for me, it was street photography because it was so technical and so different to what I did in the past. I have a kind of history and a career of product design, 10 years behind me prior to doing this photography thing. And so for street photography, I was like, yeah, this is so great. And I ended up practicing street photography every single day after work, going out into the city, minimum half an hour every single day, usually 2 hours, 3 hours, and just practicing craft. And over that time, you kind of like get absorbed into the greater community, and I was trying to find other people in Sydney like me. And so, I actually ended up finding, people like Demis, good friend of mine, and one of my, my best friends, and really, really great photography group that I've got as my own personal close friends now. Him and another friend of ours, we started doing like meets throughout Sydney under a brand, and these meets they ended up to be just so huge. I think at the time it was about like 2017, 2018, something like that. Instagram as a place, Instagram as a social media platform was a lot more friendly and a lot more community driven back then.
Yeah, because the industry itself is already quite isolating. And then you're adding in Instagram as part of that. And that's also both, it's community driven, but it's also quite isolating, or maybe hard to develop that sense of community. Yeah.
And so I think at the time, Instagram was actually very pro community, and they would, in the larger global community, there were things called like Insta meets, which is kind of where it all came from, which were literally just meets of creative people coming together and just sharing craft and, shooting it together and just hanging out. And so we kind of took the spirit of that and made our own kind of collective here in Sydney, and started doing photo walks and stuff like that. And they became absolutely massive.
Yeah.
Like, I think the largest one we had was like 300-400 people.
Really? That's huge.
Absolutely huge. So
my God.
I don't know if you're familiar with like Wynyard Station.
Yeah.
So Wynyard Station, there's like a kind of park thing at the upper exit before you go down underground. Anyway, this park is like, I don't know, maybe
I know the park you're talking
150 meters long and like
50
meters deep or whatever. And we filled it. Like,
that's insane.
You know what I mean? And it was so insane because we had this like planned route to go around, and you just have these hundreds of people like armed with cameras doing this photo route, and just going around Sydney and gallivanting around. And we obviously didn't know the level of response we would get.
Yeah.
And so it's not like it was sanctioned by anyone. We didn't have like police escorts or like, that kind of thing. So it was just mayhem, but awesome.
It was grassroots.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely grassroots kind of thing. And it kind of gave us the realization that, wow, there's actually a massive, massive community here. There's so many people in Sydney Alone. And some people had flown up from, Melbourne and so on.
Yeah.
That are just so hungry for a sense of belonging, that are so hungry to find other people like them. And so, that was a feeling that I treasured a lot, because it was really cool to be able to connect everyone together and just have a great time. At the time we had Sony sponsoring some of the prizes for the photo comps and stuff like that we were running at the time as well.
Is that how you got involved with Sony?
So after that, actually it was around that time, I actually ended up winning the Alpha Awards for abstract.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sweet.
One of my Japan photos, and I did another one, ended up winning an RX competition as well. And from there, just kind of built conversations and built connections with people at Sony. And then over the years, it's just kind of expanded and grown, and especially with Kondo having such great access to an amazing amount of Sony staff and just getting to know them and stuff like that.
Thinking back on a lot of the questions that maybe some of the other advocates and ambassadors get often is, how do you start working with big brands? How do you start working with Sony? Things like that. And the answer is often not necessarily your talent or skill or, the work that you're producing. A lot of the time it is, do you embody that spirit of community? Do you educate? Do you run workshops? Are you the kind of person that's really pushing and driving the industry forward by helping others? And I think that's really like the heart of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's it's just being in it. I think a lot of the challenge nowadays is that photography is videography, being a creative person is such an isolating experience, as you mentioned before. Oftentimes people try and sit back and do the work and almost let the people come to them, where the only way to actually get a sense of community is to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
Is to start networking, is to start driving value for other people and creating value for other people, and teaching people and making events that connect people together is a fantastic way to do that. And if you have something built, so in our case with the photo meets and stuff like that, if you have something built and it's for a cause that people can get behind, if you're connecting creatives together and that kind of stuff, like other people will also, brands, will also be like, oh, I want to be a part of this. This sounds like a really, really cool idea. And we also had like a bunch of different camera retailers and stuff on board, and giving discounts or like gift vouchers and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And it's like, you build something first and then you ask for brands, and if it's good enough, then in that instance, you'll get those affiliations.
When you were in that kind of those earlier days of the photo walks and Insta meets and stuff like that, did you find that they were a big source of inspiration? Just because, like you said, it's very isolating when you're working on your own and very often quite comparative. I know I am myself, you see things on Instagram or online and you see people maybe much further ahead in their journey than you. And there's that kind of comparative aspect. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you're working with other creatives and you're all growing together, it's not so much a competition, but I feel like a big source of inspiration. And was that a big thing for you in that kind of that period?
I think as it relates to work specifically, I'm fortunate enough to be in the position where photography is my second career, essentially. Specifically a second career as a creative person. So, when I was 22, 23, decades ago now, I had already gone through this process of being like, okay, I'm comparing myself and my work to others and peers and all those kind of things. And so I think the lesson of age is really just about knowing that, especially as a creative person, everyone's trying to do their best, and you should always ever be in a war with yourself. And trying
but
to
a healthy war, not a negative one.
Yeah. I use the word war because Stephen Pressfield's The War in Art comes up a lot for me in my life. And so for me, creativity is a battle. But it's a very healthy battle, and it's just a little bit of a different way to think about things. But yeah, in terms of inspiration with other creatives, it's less about comparison and more about the feeling of connection with one another, and knowing that we're all on the same journey together, and everyone's got the same struggles and the same triumphs and doing all the same things, and knowing that you're not alone when it can feel pretty alone. So
I know that when I started, I obviously moved to Sydney around a similar time to that, but I didn't really start my creative journey till a little bit later. But knowing that groups like this existed and communities existed that would help you on your journey, I think is just invaluable to not just the next generation, but future generations going forward.
Yeah, as I mentioned, it's like really inspiring being able to see that other people are doing the same thing as you, and taking away the isolation and that feeling of not being able to deal with the challenges of becoming a full-time creative and all those things.
So based on what we've just been talking about developing those communities back in the early kind of Sydney street scene, going forward, like what do you think there's obviously a lot of value you can add to not only your own community, but the communities of all your peers and everything else, and you do a lot of work in terms of education and YouTube. What's coming up next for you?
I'm actually making a bit of a pivot.
Yeah, I saw you announce this on Instagram.
Yeah, so after how many years? 6 or 7 years of just teaching photography.
Yeah.
In terms of education, I kind of feel like I've hit a ceiling of all the things that I've ever wanted to say about photography I've said.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't want to continue to repeat things in such a quick fashion, I guess. Especially on YouTube. YouTube's such a quickly revolving place. People expecting videos every week, once a week, and topics can get kind of dry or set already, especially when you're trying to think about different ways to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Like conceptually trying to be different and trying to deliver things in a different way. You can only kind of remix the wheel so many times.
Yeah.
And so I'm actually making a bit of a pivot to more creative business.
Okay.
So over the last little bit, half decade, I've been trying to really bolster my own creative business in this photography thing and trying to make it a big success. And I've gotten a lot of experience with working with brands, doing service-based stuff, working with teams, building my own products, building my own social media accounts, and amassing followers and all those kind of things. And so I think a lot of the problem in the modern creative person's toolkit at the moment is that no one teaches you business.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
And I want to teach creatives business, but not in a businessy kind of way.
Yeah.
And only enough such that they can make enough to have a sustainable creative life.
Yeah.
And so, what is the bridge and the delta between the two? And that's kind of what I'm going into next.
Okay, so how do you stay motivated? Because that's obviously a big challenge for someone who's been doing what you do for as long as you do. I'm only 10 years in and I'm already feeling the burnout. So in terms of what you're doing and what you're doing moving forward, what's kind of how do you stay motivated, especially with how fast social media is these days?
So this is something that, it doesn't stop coming up as a creative person. I've been a full-time creative person for over 20 years.
Yeah.
And
that's insane.
Yeah. And it's the question of inspiration and motivation and drive and all those things, they ebb and flow, and they don't ever go away. But one of the biggest tips, at least for myself, to keep motivation, inspiration, and things going is the idea of novelty.
Okay.
And specifically introducing new things into your practice or changing directions altogether, like I'm doing right now.
Changing business or creative practice or both?
Either.
Okay.
Either and then some, even within the niche of photography, for example.
Yeah. If
you are a wedding photographer, go and try some street photography. If you are shooting on APS-C or, full frame or whatever, try shooting on your phone and try and mix things up at a micro and a macro level. And I think there's a fine balance between knowing, how long to stay with something and then seeing that through to the end versus knowing, when the time is to change and to do something else.
To pivot.
And to pivot, introduce something else, introduce a level of novelty, keep yourself inspired and keep yourself interested in the thing that you're doing. I think a lot of the time, whilst consistency over a long period of time is often the key to success and the key to winning at anything, within that consistency, there are little changes that you can do to help you get to the end of the line.
Yeah.
And so, whether those changes are big or, small, as long as you're continually adding those changes, I think that's, at least has been my experience, the easiest way to kind of cure for
burnout.
A lack of motivation and burnout and all those kind of things. I'm not saying that I'm immune from burnout. I most certainly have my own spouts of burnout. Specifically for me, on a more intense level, the way I deal with that is I literally just go snowboarding for 3 months.
I respect that.
You know
I respect
what I mean?
that. Yeah.
sometimes you do just need a break that's that long from what you're doing.
Coming back from Kando, I always feel quite inspired because, you know, you get to shoot so much stuff that you usually don't shoot, like you said, something that's novel. When it comes to novelty though, like a lot of advice you might hear on other podcasts or from other kind of like mentors or coaches and things like that is really to niche down. Whereas you're saying to go against the curve, which I agree with you because I like to shoot everything. But from a business standpoint, I think a lot of people lean into the niching down because that's how you generate and build a brand and stay consistent with, income and things like that. But where do you're sitting on the other side of the line here. So that's kind of exciting and I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me give you the thing about niching down from my perspective.
Okay, sweet.
Because I feel pretty passionate about this. With niching down, advice that you get from people is only reflective of the period of life that they're in.
Yeah, okay.
And with niching down, it's like you might hear some advice being like, you should only do this and focus on this for this amount of time. Yeah. And for that period of time, for that person, that's the correct advice. But for a different person under different circumstances, in a different stage of life, that advice might not be correct.
Yeah.
And so it's really about like filtering that piece of advice and understanding how that applies to your own life and whether or not that is actually the right piece of advice for you to go down.
Yeah, okay.
Because at some points of your life, niching down most certainly is the correct thing to do. But if you've gone through that and you come out the other side, then that's most certainly not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So it just depends on where you are. And this feedback and advice, it's pretty general and it applies to a lot of things in the creative sphere.
Yeah.
And just business in general and, just kind of life in general. But, feedback is only useful as much as you can apply it to your own life.
Yeah.
And if you are taking feedback at the wrong time, at the wrong stage of your life, then you might as well just try feedback from someone else.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting as well about the divide between maybe the photo and the filmmaking community is that a lot of photographers will niche down, but a good DOP or a good cinematographer can shoot anything.
Right.
And I find that really interesting. Like as a stills photographer who's then gone into video, I want to treat my stills like a cinematographer, where I want to not necessarily be a creative Swiss Army knife, but you think, well, like if you understand the lighting, you understand emotion, storytelling, how can you apply that to stills in the same way that a really good DOP does? Right,
exactly. Yeah. And especially with the DOP, if you think about the arc of skill acquisition for that person, a DOP is respected because they're a generalist of many things. They're good at a lot of things, right? But how did they get there? They went and niched down into specific things, got really, really good at that, then back out and then tried something else and got really, really good at that and did that enough times such that they have a very broad range of skills that they're great at.
Which makes them desirable from both a business standpoint, but also someone to learn from as well, definitely.
Exactly. And so that's where the whole niching down thing is like, okay, well, what stage are you at? Like, do you want to go deep on something and become a specialist in something?
Yeah.
And then how long do you stay there? And then you come out again and then you start, increasing your skills over a broad range and all those kind of things. And I first learned this idea in product design because we talk about like E-shaped and T-shaped skills.
Okay, this is interesting. I've never heard this before.
So this is like, you think of the letter T, right? And it's like if you're a graphic designer, within the skill set of graphic design, there are a lot of meta skills that you can learn, and you might become a specialist at one thing, and that thing might be typography, for example, right? And you spend a significant amount of time going down this T, getting amazing at this thing, and you become a specialist at it, and you identify as, being a graphic designer, and then, being a specialist at typography. Then over time, when you become a senior or a lead, or you're working your way up the corporate ladder or whatever it is, you become more of an E-shaped person because you've mastered typography. You come out, you might do illustration. You might master that for a couple of years. You come out, you do something else.
Yeah.
And suddenly like your skill set looks like an E.
Yeah.
And then over time, given the same like career path, you become more like a hairbrush. It's like you have lots of
I like that.
you
I like
have
that a
lots
lot.
of prongs. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So that's kind of the skill arc of any creative, really. When you think about photography, I'm a travel photographer. Well, I identify as one.
Yeah, because you said about not niching down, and obviously the body of your work, from a first glance, may appear very city street focused, but on deeper kind of like looking through, there's big degree of like portraits, travel, landscape, editorial. Like there's so much in there.
Right.
Yeah.
And so as a travel photographer, for me, my definition of travel photography is specifically street documentation and how people live, where people live, so landscapes and, urban cities and all those kind of things, and then the people themselves.
Yeah.
So what is that? Street photography, landscape, and portraiture.
Yeah.
Sometimes a little bit of architecture thrown in there as well,
Yeah, okay.
just for fun. But they all required very different skill sets.
Yeah, I was going to say it's very multidisciplinary.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I really, really like about travel photography, having the ability to go down those different routes and give myself that level of novelty, being able to come to a city and being like, I want to go and see the art museum. And then I want to go and walk on the streets for a while. And then I want to go and talk to a local. And then I want to go and see what the most common thing, landscape building thing is here to go and see.
That novelty comes from location first and foremost, you feel?
Yeah, location and being able to just use the skills in different areas within the same location. If you're going to a city and you're only seeing the best views of that city, do you, like, in my opinion, like, I think, do you really understand how that city works and, the culture and all those kind of things? I think you really need to speak to the people, see how they live, go and catch public transport and do all that kind of stuff in order to feel the real beating heart of a city.
Yeah. Okay. So you did move to Japan. Was that because you wanted to really dig into the delving heart of that, like that big cultural change?
Yeah. So like at some stage in my career, a lot of my work, a lot of the things I was becoming, quote unquote, renowned for were all based in Japan.
Yeah.
And there was a period of time where it was like, okay, well, I'm traveling twice a month back to Japan.
Yeah, okay, that's a lot.
For an entire year.
Yeah.
I'm doing 20 flights just to Japan a year or whatever it is. And I was like, this is insane.
Yeah, like fair enough.
I should probably move here.
Yeah, okay.
And so the first time I moved was pre-COVID, and I was on the working holiday visa, which is like the best visa because you don't have to do anything. And loved it. COVID happened, and then I was like, oh, I need to like come back home to Australia because, the borders are shutting and all the rest of it. And then after that whole period of time, it was like, okay, it's time to move back to Japan.
Yeah.
And so now I've been there for coming up officially 2 years, but more like 3 years.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of the work is like in Japan, close to Japan. I love Japan. It's like, it's been my life for the last 8 years. And there's something about it. Like I grew up in Sydney.
Yeah.
And I've explored every single coastline, every single inch of the coastline on the east side of Sydney.
Yeah.
And
there's only so many times you can shoot Bombo.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, whereas in Japan, I've traveled all up and down the entire country now.
Yeah.
I've been to almost every single prefecture. I've been to the northernmost point, the easternmost point, about to go to the southernmost point in like 2 weeks or something like that. I love it. The variety of things you can do there, the variety of things you can shoot, the people, the culture, all those kind of things. They're so different to the Australian upbringing and the Western upbringing at large. Mm-hmm. And it keeps a level of novelty that I really treasure and can keep going for a long period of time.
I'm not gonna lie, I was in Tokyo and Kyoto across like a little bit of October, November, and there is something special about the quality of light.
Yeah.
There's just something that we have a very like clear skyline here, like very clear air, but there's something special about kind of the early morning and late sunset in and around Kyoto and Tokyo, where just there's this like beautiful glow and there's this haze that I can't quite describe. I know it's probably pollution, but it is beautiful.
Especially at that time of year though.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it has a very like
ethereal,
almost like alpine glow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when you go into, you know, Europe and stuff like that, and you're getting into the twilight hours, especially in like a late or early winter kind of vibe. It's like there's a little haze, a little mist, a little light cast that you see that just happens a little bit more. And Japan has a lot of that during this period of that specific period of time.
In your editing process, are you kind of accentuating that as well? Because I know like a lot of your images have very strong highlights, but also like they're very soft at the same time and a lot of like glow. Are you shooting with a mist filter or are you doing a lot of that in editing? Just curious.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think like originally negative clarity was never a thing. Especially at my early stages of photography, it was always like positive clarity.
Yeah, crank that slider.
Crank it, detail all the things all the time. And at the time, 2017, something like that, I just decided to like go against the grain and started like exploring more softer techniques. People were using. So stuff like autumn effect and negative clarity and all that kind of stuff. But now my kind of signature throughout the career has just been like, maybe a -20, maybe a -30 kind of negative clarity kind of thing.
Yeah, but it really, I think for a lot of your work that is done in Japan, it's quite minimal, as in there's very clean frames, good strong contrast, things like that. And I think that softer clarity or just a softer image in general really accentuates the key kind of like eye drawing components of the images, right?
Yeah, and it's a nostalgia that I'm trying to evoke. Yeah, I think Japan landscapes they're quite iconic, and for a lot of people they hold a lot of memory, and that's kind of one of the things that I'm trying to evoke by doing things like more grain and negative clarity and shooting with a perhaps slightly lower contrast ratio than other people might shoot edit at, and giving a more filmic look to it. I think that really helps the subject matter that I'm trying to shoot at the same time. So
yeah, not necessarily contrast in terms of the technical tones, but contrast across the image in terms of bringing the subject out. And like you said, like you're really kind of trying to evoke the storytelling in the actual image itself.
That's right. Yeah. And that really, the editing techniques on top of that really, really speak to that kind of technique.
Yeah. So when we're talking about finding inspiration and staying motivated to keep shooting or keep creating and things like that, what inspiration do you draw from, or other photographers, filmmakers, creatives, or do you draw from inspiration outside of your genre?
I think this is a really important question for a lot of people. It's all well and good to draw inspiration from your own niche. And I think to a certain degree, probably more than most people would realize.
Yeah. Okay.
You need to really immerse yourself within the niche that you are in so that you understand what good looks like.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a funny term, being like, what is good, what is bad, and it being so subjective.
Right. And then from there, the next kind of step from that is, how do you define between good and popular? Being in the industry and your niche and understanding those two very different things, and having a really good understanding of that, and then being able to take inspiration and understand, okay, does this serve me? Does this not serve me? Et cetera, et cetera. I think that's really, really important. And I think a lot of creatives don't spend enough time understanding what good looks like, what popular looks like, and then how their work either fits into those things.
Ideally both.
Ideally both,
Yeah.
sure. For like we've been talking a lot about on this podcast with like business stuff, popularity is actually really important.
Yeah.
Like from a business perspective, popularity and doing things people enjoy consuming, watching, being entertained by, learning from, etc., is really important. But things can be both good and popular and also come from yourself. So I think inspiration-wise, getting to that level is really important. And then you can start to see, okay, in my niche, these kind of things inspire me. So I want to like get more of that particular bit of inspiration.
Whether that's like editing or it could be, composition or style or tone and things like that.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
So like when I was in my early like landscape, trying to learn and master that, I was looking at people like Chris Burkhardt and Alex Stroll and
Alex Stroll's a big one for me as well.
Yeah. I've actually done some stuff with Alex in the past.
That's sweet.
And he's a great guy.
Yeah.
But I was very influenced by that kind of minimal style and that kind of simple and elegant approach to landscape photography.
Yeah.
And so for them, I knew that this is the kind of landscape style I would want to emulate. But once I understood that, it's for me generally, and this is how I've been in my previous career as well, it's what are the other things around in the creative field that I can then bring into my own process. Yeah. For me at the time, I was a huge weeb and,
Yeah, okay.
And so I loved anime. And specifically, when I look at anime, and I remember this one video that I made that absolutely bombed, and it didn't do well at all.
Yeah, okay.
But I love it, and I still remember it to this day.
Yeah.
And it was a video on analyzing compositions in anime.
Yeah, like a technical breakdown of
of like how
like frame by frame level, or
scene by scene.
Yeah, okay.
Like what do I like about this scene from this anime, and what do I like about in this scene, how did the animators like decide to compose a particular scene? Yeah. What colors do they use? What layout do they use? What kind of juxtaposition are they looking for? Are they using emotional beats? All those kind of things. And I remember I loved making it so much because so much of my inspiration came from the way Japanese manga artists and anime artists compose their scenes.
Yeah, and there's such an emphasis on movement and action in such a stylized way, which I also really appreciate. And you can see that like in terms of like, capturing movement in street and things like that, where you're really trying to emphasize the movement. Sometimes, using, you can shoot slow shutter, you can freeze, like there's so much you can do creatively, but street and travel, a landscape that's still can be really, really aesthetic and beautiful, but it's not exciting.
For me, it's the level of intentionality that they had and they still have, because with animation, you're unlike photography where you're just capturing a fraction, a moment in time. An animator has to be like, okay, I have to invest 24 frames a second. I have to do this 24 times every single second. Like this scene better be damn good. You know what I mean? So there's like a lot of intention behind, how they set up the gait of a walk, or like, the simplicity of using a half body, completely empty sky kind of cut off scene to like illustrate a sense of like wonder and magic, right? So there's a level of simplicity in an anime composition that is so respectful of visual elements that I really, really enjoyed, especially as a former designer. It's like, it was always like, how can you make the most elegant solution with, the least amount of components, the least amount of like visual clutter.
Yeah.
The most elegant solution. And I approach my photography in the same way. And I think that has been one of my biggest inspirations. It's like, how do you visually communicate a photograph, the core essence of a photograph, with the least number of elements that you can use?
Also, we talked about this at Kando, but I'm going to bring it up again. You've kept every image you've ever taken, and I had to bring it up because it just blows my mind, because I'm a chronic deleter.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
had to bring it up again.
Yeah, totally.
It's worth digging into though.
Yeah. For context, we're talking about Lightroom catalogs.
Yeah.
And how you have a catalog for everything.
Yeah, I have a new catalog for every shoot.
And
you laughed at me.
Yeah. I think, look, ultimately there's no right or wrong way.
Yeah.
Whatever works for you is whatever works for you.
Yeah.
For me, I enjoy having my entire collection and then kind of categorizing my entire collection
within. You're talking about like keyword searching and stuff like that.
So I'm actually not a big keyword searcher, but I'm a huge collections user.
Yeah, okay.
So I have folders upon folders upon folders, and then I use every version of like categorization you can use. So like flagging, quick collections, smart collections, ratings, stars, the whole shebang.
The whole thing, yeah. Okay.
The whole shebang. And yeah, I have my entire collection in one catalog. I organize it by year, and then I have the date and then a little like description on what that thing is. And it allows me to just like go back in time and be like, okay, 2014, 2015, I did this, whatever. And I can just kind of remember what year that is and then quickly find the date. And I don't know, it just works for me.
Yeah, okay.
I plug in
so much storage.
So much storage, yes.
Yeah.
So I travel with 32 terabytes of storage with me everywhere I go.
That's insane. How much did you shoot at Condo?
Not a lot.
Yeah. I feel like this year was really social and like it was all about the people. So I didn't shoot that much either.
Absolutely. But I think for me, I'm always quite intentional about my shots anyway.
Yeah, you were talking about this as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, especially at the start of my journey, street photography, you're trying to get that, decisive moment.
Yeah.
The decisive moment is literally just the moment in time that expresses the essence of whatever is going on the most clearly.
Yeah.
Usually in street photography, that's like the gait of someone walking.
Yeah.
Right? A gait where like
the weight's on the front foot.
Or on the opposite, right? Like if it's like if both feet line up, it doesn't look like someone's walking.
Yeah.
Right? So you want a spread out kind of gait to make it look like someone's walking. And so to do that in street photography, I had to learn how to burst fire quite a lot and pick out the decisive moment after that.
Yeah.
And so I wasted a lot of time and a lot of space and a lot of learning trying to pick that up.
Yeah.
And over time, you just kind of learn, okay, in this scene, this is the moment that's going to express it the best.
Yeah.
And so I'm always looking for those scenes and trying to shoot a little bit more deliberately and slow down quite a bit.
Yeah.
If I do find a moment for high burst scenarios, then I'll have the shortcut button on the front, on the A1 or whatever, and then it'll just quickly go and burst and I'll get that shot. But otherwise, I actually don't take that many photos.
Yeah.
Because generally I know what I want out of any given scene.
I think that's kind of the arc that most creatives follow is that I don't think I haven't necessarily become a better photographer from when I started. Like obviously there is a degree. Yes, you get better. You learn the techniques, you learn more techniques. But in terms of like the shooting ratio, I haven't become better. I just take worse photos.
Right.
Like when I started or when you started, maybe once every couple of weeks or once every couple of months, you take like, oh my God, that's like I'm so proud of this image. But instead of that happening on a frequency of every couple of weeks, every couple of months, I know for you it might have been every day, but for me it would be like once a year. You take one that you'd be like, wow, like I've really learned something from this. And then over time, instead of it being once a year, it's a couple of times a year, and then it's a couple of times a month, and then it's when you're working as like a commercial photographer, it's like every day you have to deliver an incredible image.
Absolutely.
So, and I think, I feel like you take less bad photos and you just start taking more good ones.
Yeah, right. There's a very common trope saying, I guess, in the street photography kind of niche where it's like, out of 99 shots, you'll only get one keeper.
Yeah.
Or one select or whatever it is. And the game is just lowering that number until
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Until you can get one of one.
Yeah. One of one.
One of one.
Right.
Exactly.
Less editing. Awesome.
Imagine you just rock up to a scene. Boom. I'm done.
Okay. So if you were starting again, what would be the kind of direction or those key talking points or kind of those key takeaways you would impart on someone who wants to get into travel, tourism, street photography, all the stuff we've talked about so far?
I think if you're trying to develop a career and you're serious about developing a career, I think that's like the best first step. Because I think too many people kind of do photography as a hobby and then keep the mentality of keeping it as a hobby.
Yeah, okay.
And then expect more from it. And I think that's actually kind of backwards.
Okay.
I think starting as a hobby is great, but literally like the mentality of switching between this is a hobby that I do for fun versus this is a thing that I want to spend the rest of my life doing and living from.
That's a very different mindset.
Completely worlds apart.
Yeah.
And so what I see a lot is a lot of people starting photography as a hobby, which is great, but then wanting the life from a full-time photographer.
Yeah.
But keeping everything else as a hobbyist.
Yeah, okay.
And so if you're if you want to be a full-time photographer, videographer, creative person, I think the first step is most certainly to make the mindset shift of I need to make this work.
Yeah, okay.
That's
what I did. I left a 9-to-5 job, and it's kind of like you have to make it. Like you have to hunt for jobs. You just have to go all in.
Right.
And I know a lot of people that try to do like a transition from full-time to, like a full-time 9-to-5 to a full-time photographer or filmmaker. But it is really hard to do both, like trying to juggle effectively two workloads.
Yeah. So I actually did the same thing.
Okay.
So, leaving a product design career of 10 years, was in a nice, like cushy tech job.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was doing photography and then, starting to get jobs and all the rest of it. And I was like, oh, you know what? I could probably make like a living out of this. I could probably make a decent living out of this.
Was there like a defining moment where you were like, oh, like this is possible? Yeah. Or was it a gradual kind of change?
It's a gradual change. When I remember I like first started getting like retainer jobs for, watch companies and, just photography jobs here and there through my Instagram and stuff like that when that was, kind of coming up. And over time, it's like, you get more and more jobs and you realize, oh, I could probably, if I do this more, I could probably make a full-time living out of this.
Yeah.
And so the goal was for me to save enough money through my product design job to give myself a year's worth of runway and also at the same time have enough recurring jobs coming in from the photography side so that I could make my best effort at making the leap and then, giving it everything for my first year and then, making it after that.
Yeah.
And so, I think the mind shift I think for me, I was kind of lucky because Instagram gave me a lot of those opportunities.
Yeah.
And gave me the belief that the jobs would come in and that there was going to be recurring income here somehow. Yeah. And leveraging the other businesses I've made in my life and all those other things and starting to make like photography related products and tourism related products and all those kind of things and bolstering income. And that just gives you more confidence to know that you're going to make it.
Yeah. And it's like not necessarily a safety net, but yeah, it definitely feels better knowing that there's not necessarily like a path that's just paved out in front of you, but you know the direction that it needs to go in. If you could give like one technical piece of advice for street photography, like for me, for working with portraits and editorial work, my number one is just shoot backlit. Mm-hmm. That's like my number one.
Yeah. So this one is seemingly simple, but kind of hard to master. And it's the same advice that I actually give for portraiture.
Okay.
Which is find the in-between.
Okay. You have to elaborate. I'm intrigued.
Find the in-between means like in street photography, when you're in a scene and you understand how the scene is going to unfold.
Yeah. Like you're predicting it.
You're predicting it. Like some person is going from this corner of the street and they're walking and they're going to end up on this corner of the street. And so you know the general path that they're going to go. The traditional kind of preemptive approach might be to wait till that person is in the middle of the road and then you take the photo.
Yeah.
Right? For me, that's fine, all well and good. But what would happen if, it was just the in-between moment of that instead?
Yeah, okay.
Where maybe like a car would be coming in prior to them crossing the road. And then suddenly like you have them on the kind of left third and then like a car on the right third. And then it almost looks like they're walking into the car or something like that. And and suddenly like the scene shifts and changes.
Yeah.
In a portraiture setting, it's like sometimes the best poses aren't actually the ones that the model strikes.
Yeah, it's like the moment afterwards where they start laughing or they're like you said, like between poses or something when they're not putting on that like mask.
Exactly.
I was going to say, as soon as you mentioned it, I was like, I know exactly, because like with shooting weddings, we use these kind of tools all the time to try and, you make the couple do something funny and you're not actually trying to shoot the awkward moment when they're trying to figure it out. You're shooting the comedy that happens after it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So but you can use that in street. That's really interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And this goes down to like how you find specific subjects as well. So like there was a really big like trend of like shooting hands.
Yeah, I remember
recently.
this. It was really cool because it's
really cool.
It's a unique take on kind of like the detail shot.
Right.
Yeah.
But that comes from, the general trope from that comes from shooting people from behind and, people just having their hands behind their back. And, I walk like this because I'm an old man. And
I was going to say, it's usually older. It's usually older men.
And,
but there's a lot of story in those hands.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's the normal scene. Right, it's always like a wide-ish, maybe a mid-ish kind of shot. Someone's back, the hands behind the back, and you're kind of following them, right? And that's the typical shot. But then, like, how do you kind of search for the in-between moments, the stuff that people don't usually see?
Yeah,
whether that is maybe that person has like a really interesting haircut, and then you like zoom in on real detail on that, right? Or maybe that person is wearing shoes and they're about to step in a puddle. And then you take the photo of the reflection of the puddle rather than the big wide shot of everything else.
Yeah, okay.
It's like, how can you notice those details in between the main shots that add texture, add emotion to a story, right? And so those hands are one of those.
Yeah.
And, it is the hands that just happen to speak a lot to the emotion of like what someone lives through.
Yeah.
When it comes to a street photography perspective.
I really like the idea of like a carousel where instead of just having one hero image, I love carousels more than I like probably like single images.
Absolutely.
Just because, like you said, like if you intersperse those hero images with those in-between moments, like you get a really good understanding of like, say you were shooting one specific street. Now the viewer can really build a picture both like spatially, but then also like emotively, they can build the scene in their head.
Right.
Yeah.
And so coming back to the question, it's like, this is the biggest tip. Like when you go to a fancy landscape, take that hero shot that everyone takes.
Yeah.
100%. You have to
because
do it.
you kind of want it in your...
You kind of want it anyway.
Yeah.
You're there, you might as well do it.
Yeah.
But then quickly go and do something else. Like try and find a different angle. What are the opportunities in between, right? What are the things that you can shoot that add more texture and more context to your main hero image? Those are the things that can really, try and elevate you very quickly.
All right, so bit of a wrap up now. What's next for you?
Well, I actually fly back tomorrow morning, back to Japan, and then going straight into hiking.
Hopefully snowboarding, right?
Well, I mean, at the end of the season, end of the year, absolutely. But I'm actually climbing Mount Fuji.
Oh, wow.
It's my next thing.
Super exciting.
Third time.
I was about to ask if you'd done it before. I was assuming you had.
Yeah. So very excited for that. And then back onto the business and creative mentorship stuff for Creative Freedom.
Where can people find you if they don't follow you or like they're not following your journey already, which you should? Where can we find you?
Yeah, so just Instagram and YouTube for the photography stuff is just Pat K. And then for the business stuff is Creative Freedom with Pat K.
Yeah, and we'll put all the links in the description in the show notes as well. Thanks so much, Pat, for coming in and sharing so much of your journey so far. Love to chat to you again at Carno next year as well, and hopefully again on the podcast sometime.
We can catch up next year,
Yeah, it's always like, oh, I'll see you next year. Yeah. We've got lots of new guests coming up, so stay tuned. All the details will be on the sonyalpha.anz Instagram page. Really looking forward to seeing what this becomes.